I am pleased to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Andy Josephson. Dr. Josephson is Chair of Neurology at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Josephson, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate everybody joining us for this webinar here the Friday afternoon before Memorial Day. We're going to get a chance to really dive into educational issues surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic and its recovery and spend a lot of time having an interactive session. So let's go to the next slide. I'll start with a few opening remarks. First, probably everybody is a Zoom expert at this point, but I would remind you that all lines have been muted. The way to get questions to us, this will be an interactive session and we really want your questions, is to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat button. The chat button should be used only for technical questions for the AAN staff. So please, the Q&A button to submit questions as we go. At the end, there will be a post-webinar, just 2-question poll to please complete, and we'd ask for you to do so. Next slide, please. I would just remind people that the Academy has spent a tremendous amount of time collating a variety of really helpful COVID-19 resources in its COVID-19 Neurology Resource Center. There's a ton of things to look at here. I know I've myself gone on it frequently, and I think it's a really nice place to look for any resources that you're looking for that haven't been addressed in this particular webinar. Go to the next slide, please. Within that resource center is going to be also a recording of the webinars that we've had previously. And this is the 4th webinar that we've had. The first one included best practices for inpatient services, including vascular neurology, neurocritical care, and neurohospitalist services, and touched a little bit on telemedicine. The second webinar, which I think was memorable for those of us who got a chance to see it, involved New York City's neurology response during the COVID surge, which I thought was tremendously interesting. And then the last one that we had on May 8th really focused on clinical operations as we think about reactivation of neurology department activities post-COVID. So this is our 4th webinar focusing on education. Next slide, please. Within the Neurology Resource Center that the AAN has put together is a page on education that includes a variety of resources that are helpful for both clerkship directors and program directors. And I would urge you to go to this page and explore. Again, this is a jumping off point for information that we're going to talk about during this webinar. For those of you that are clerkship directors on the phone, the business meeting occurred last week. For those of you who are in the CNPD for program directors, that business meeting will be via Zoom on June 4th from 4 to 5, and please contact Lucy Persad if there are questions or you need more information. Next slide, please. So there's a couple ways to do this, but we thought the best way to really address as many questions as possible, and we got 60 some odd submitted to us ahead of time, was to really run this entirely as a moderated session. And so we're going to focus on education and training with a great panel that we put together. We're going to touch on residents, students, fellows, and then worry both about current practice and then looking towards the future as we now get to a recovery phase where we're coexisting with this virus and thinking about how we would deal with smaller surges that may occur throughout the year. Next slide, please. We put together a great panel. I'll introduce people and they're all popping up on your screen. It includes Dave Greer, Department Chair at Boston University, Jaffer Khan, who's Professor and Vice Chair for Education at Emory, who's also the Chair of our AAN Graduate Education Subcommittee, Ralph Sacco, the Department Chair at the University of Miami, AAN past President, who chairs our AAN Academic Initiative and Neurology Chair Working Group, Mona Soni, who's an Associate Professor at Rush University, who chairs our AAN Undergraduate Education Subcommittee, and Gordon Smith, Department Chair at Virginia Commonwealth University, who chairs our Education Committee. I'll note that Dr. Robin Bray, who chairs the University of Texas in San Antonio, was supposed to be with us today, but couldn't at the last minute due to another commitment. So we'll try to pinch hit for Robin in her areas of expertise. Next, please. So I'd like to remind people as we take the slides down that if you have further topics or suggestions on what we can do on future webinars, please send them to Sue or Claire, who'll be happy to. We're looking for more of these webinars, new topics to help us all gather as a community. And if you have ideas, let us know. So I'd like to take the slides down and move on to the panel if we could. Remind people to use the Q&A function to send us questions as we go, and I'll try to intercalate these into our discussion. Let's begin by talking about residents. As those of you know, those of us who work with residents all the time know that this has been a challenge for our learners, and we'll start by talking about the residents who have had some questions regarding resident morale during the pandemic, especially in light of residents having a range of emotions as they try to balance participating in this very different frontline care with their educational needs. Let me start with you, Dave. At BU and more broadly, how are residents feeling and what's being done to help with their morale?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. This is obviously a very major issue because these are clearly our most frontline providers in most places. I would say number one is being very proactive about your communication. Be very transparent and give them as much data as you can whenever you can. The more you can eliminate the unknown, the better they feel. Even if you say, I don't know and nobody knows, they feel a little bit better with that also because they feel like you're not hiding anything from them. We had limited communication from our hospital initially in terms of statistics, how many patients did we have, really basic things like that. And that freaked everybody out. As soon as that data started coming out on a daily basis, everybody felt a lot better. Even though we knew that the numbers were going up, we knew what the numbers were. And that was very empowering. In terms of the educational balance, continue the didactics virtually. I can't emphasize that enough. We kept lockstep with this, that we just switched everything over to Zoom right away. We moved morning report over to Zoom. We do it every day with them. Continue to teach on rounds. Don't do Zoom rounds. Show up and be there and actually continue to teach. If you have clinician educators on your faculty, which everybody does, this is a really great time for them to step up and be innovative and think about different ways to teach that they can even publish on, which is often difficult in medical education. So people have time on their hands, both the attendings and the residents. It's important to take that wisely. The emotional part of it cannot be overstated. This is really hard. It's scary for everyone. I'm scared, everybody's scared. Come out front with that and admit it. Don't try to act like a tough guy. It's very important that everybody feel validated for how they're feeling. We said very early on that people are going to respond differently to this depending on how they're made up. And you may look really imposing and strong on the outside and not be as strong as you would like on the inside. Whatever you can do is important, and don't be too hard on yourself. Everybody's effort is appreciated and valued. Some people will be able to step up more than others, but this should be a no judgment time. People should be valued for whatever they can contribute whenever they can. Praise them frequently. Tell them you appreciate the good job they're doing. Do it publicly. Send it out in departmental emails. Thank them for their hard efforts. They want to hear that. It's very important. And then feed them. Residents respond to food. If you can take care of their worry about where's their lunch going to come from, where's their dinner going to come from. We're paying for all the lunches, and we have been for about a month and a half now. They are so appreciative of that. It's just the little things. I mean, feeding residents has always been important, and it's probably even more so now. So those are some of the main things that I would start with.
Gordon, did you have some other experiences you might want to add?
Yeah, so we kind of had the opposite problem with communication. So as soon as this crisis started, our dean's office started to vomit forth immense amounts of communication that were very confusing. And of course, the problem was things moved so quickly so that by the time you read through those communications, things had changed. And this was enormously disconcerting to our trainees who were on the front lines. So we tried to seize control of communication by creating regular routes of communication. So weekly town halls, virtual town halls with residents, with department leadership. with added town halls when key moments came up. So for instance, the first time we had a resident redeployed to the emergency department, this caused a lot of consternation, and we had a town hall about that. And then rather than daily emails, I actually got this idea from the senior vice president at the University of Utah. I still have my old email account, and every day they send out a 3 things to know email. So I just stole that idea. And we've been sending 3 things you need to know emails out periodically so that we chunk it out. So instead of having this really long email with just gobs of information, just pick a digestible sort of your cognitive load can handle it. The other thing I would say is I think it was Steve Galetta who in that really great second webinar said food is love. And I think most people perceive institutions as not loving them, but people loving them. So we've actually had individual faculty buy food for residents so that every day it's a different faculty member. So residents pick what they want, they go buy it, and then we Venmo them. And so there's a face. They know that I think it was last Friday I bought lunch. I can't remember where I bought it from, but we've been doing that, and that's really made a big difference. And I think the last thing is really focusing on safety. I don't know if Dave said this, but really communicating clearly about PPE and just a dedication to safety so that for those who are reasonably anxious about this, we can reassure them and make sure they know we've got their back.
Now, one of the things you said, Gordon, was that you picked up on a resident being redeployed to an emergency medicine rotation. And maybe I'll turn to Jaffer. I mean, residents are getting redeployed in some institutions, and furthermore, a lot of people are missing rotations that they had scheduled for one reason or the other. And I guess I'd ask, is there any concern about these residents achieving their competencies for graduation? And I'd pull back not just the senior residents, but the junior residents, even the interns. Jaffer, where are we with that? Is that a concern of yours? Is that something that's come up?
I think you hit the 2 major categories that are impacting, that could potentially impact reaching the competencies and milestones that our residents need to meet. One is redeployment. The other are the procedural-based specialties that need numbers, as well as the outpatient clinic that was essentially shut down. So going to redeployment first, very variable. So in some cases, residents were redeployed only within their own program. So an outpatient-based resident may not have that rotation. They would go to the inpatient service. The extreme exists as well, where we had residents that were redeployed into other training programs. So going to the emergency department, as we heard from Gordon, as well as going into the MICU, and even reporting to non-neurologists, reporting to internists, reporting to emergency medicine doctors. I think the gist of our seniors that are about to graduate is the majority had met program requirements already. And so that's fortunate. So they are prepared to go out, graduate, and move on to the next step, whether it's fellowship or practice. The ACGME and ABMS agreed that it really is up to the program director to attest whether the resident, the soon-to-be graduate, has met all criteria for the independent practice of neurology. When we look at some of the procedure-based specialties, most of our program requirements don't have numbers associated with them. It's not true of epilepsy, but EMG, et cetera, sleep, there's not a current number that we have to abide by. For epilepsy, there are numbers, however, those numbers are very low. And as far as meeting criteria and program requirements, more than likely those will meet as well. But it is a concern, and it will be taken on a case-by-case basis.
Ralph, let me turn to you. Jaffer just mentioned something about the seniors. This time of year for me, this is graduation time. We call our senior sign out in sort of a funny way. It's one of the best nights of the year for our entire department. What's happening? Are you doing a virtual graduation, Ralph? What's going on in Miami to try to recognize all the hard work of these seniors with perhaps not able to have the same kind of ceremony you're used to having?
Yeah, that's a tough one because graduation has become such a nice event. We've often in the past invited family members in, so their families came, their children were there, we celebrated them during the day, and then in the evening there was always this big party where they got to roast the faculty. So that's going to change, obviously. The numbers at our place, first of all, as of June, they're saying you can have a gathering of up to 30 people. I don't know where they got the number, but the 30 people still have to remain 6 feet apart. So what we've decided is to do a hybrid. We're going to have some in person. So for example, that we have 12 residents who are graduating. The 12 residents, the program director, the associate program director, the two coordinators, and myself will be in a room separated out. And then we're going to telecast that for others to see. Family members can come in and see the virtual event, but that'll at least give some personalization between our program directors and the graduating residents. We're also trying something different this year. Usually I would kind of read a little bit of their biography. We're going to have each different faculty member take one of the residents and then do a little bit of their biography. And we're going to probably either record that in advance or have that zoomed in to kind of add some, extra people talking. So it's not just talking heads doing that. We've separated out the awards. The awards are separate now. Used to be we had this long graduation and we gave out awards. We're going to do that in a separate event with the whole department. That will be virtual. And then of course the residents want to do a party. So they want to do it on the beach, but the beaches are closed in Miami right now. So we're not still sure what the party situation will be. Right now there is no official party in the department. We're also thinking about a video that we can do to that they could put together, which they kind of do a lot of pictures of all the great times they've had over the 4 years. And we're going to allow them to do that. And obviously that can all easily be done virtually. Fellows also are part of graduation. So after the residents leave the room, then we're going to have each fellowship program come in and then rotate that through with the program director for the fellows. So it's a hybrid. It's the best we can do, but I think it's at least it does give a little bit of an in-person feel, and then the family members to go in and be part of the celebration virtually.
Yeah, this is tough. We're still at a place in San Francisco at UCSF. We can't have a gathering of 2. So our number is 1. So we're going to do it all via a virtual way. I've learned a lot from how the graduation programs of the medical students went. This last Monday, UCSF had its big medical school graduation, and they did a really, really nice job with a lot of the modifications that you describe, Ralph. And so we just got to find great ways to celebrate these people. Let me back up to something that Dave talked about. David talked about didactics, and boy, it's key for resident morale to keep these going. Gordon, let me start with you. Are you still doing these didactic sessions just like before, not missing a beat, like Dave said, only switching them to virtual? What tips do you have for the group?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the risk of not listening to your advice, we agree with Dave. So we viewed this as an opportunity to maintain normalcy. We have, as I think many of you do, residents scattered amongst another number of different locations, and we routinely use Zoom for our conferences. Ironically, before the COVID crisis, we struggled with Zoom, and now it's working really well, which shows, I guess, that we're capable of learning. So we've continued this as really a part of our norm, which I think has been reassuring. There is a bit of a twist because I think we're now engaging our residents even more so as educators, particularly for students, which I guess we'll probably get to in a few moments, Andy. I think the other thing that we're doing is really trying to take advantage of the annual meeting on demand product that the Academy provided free to all members and diplomates of the ABPN. I mean, that's been available for obviously every year for a long time, and I know a lot of programs use it, but this has been very popular for our residents, both in terms of backfilling didactics if something comes up and a lecturer can't be there, but in particular for self-guided learning. And Mona and Jaffer and their respective subcommittees have put together really nice draft curricula that our program director and clerkship director have access to. So I think we're thinking of this as a way to be normal and then use some of the resources that have been provided by the Academy to supplement.
I could just interject, 2 things I would say. One, everything is starting on time, and in Miami, nothing ever started on time. Now with Zoom, our conferences are starting on time. And 2, the attendance is breaking records. Because now, even if you are scheduled at a different hospital, you can get in. Our grand rounds are like oversubscribed more than I've ever seen because everybody can attend regardless of where they are. So there are some advantages.
Yeah, we're focusing on education. Grand rounds is another one. I also say for faculty meetings, I've never seen such great attendance. I doubt they want to hear from me more. I think it's just the ease of this. Jaffer, at Emory, are you doing anything else with these didactics that builds on what Ralph and Gordon said?
I can add a couple of things. So one, what's interesting about Grand Rounds is, yes, attendance has improved, but our visiting speakers are no longer visiting, but they're still giving the Grand Rounds, which has been awesome and much easier, I think, for the visiting speaker. In addition to that, what I've seen are institutions collaborating together and putting on such a sort of network of lecture series that residents and medical students as well from across the country are now attending. We're even seeing a rise in trivia games, national trivia games. Pierce Corb is running one out of Colorado. I think, Andy, you mentioned that one of your residents has been doing this, and there's another group, and hopefully we're going to start engaging this platform with our academy. And you know, it's fun, it promotes well-being, and it promotes education as well. We've also seen case discussions in addition to didactics occur with case presentations and with input from residents. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. The Zoom platform that we all feared before has actually worked out in a tremendous way for education.
Yeah, as you said, on Wednesday night here at UCSF, our residents have a trivia night, which has just really helped build morale and help us all feel like we're together. The only disappointment is when I play, I don't do particularly well. But other than that, it's been really a home run. Mona, let me bring you in because we're going to start talking about medical students. Let's talk about the transition from medical students to residents. We all have a number of individuals from all over the country who on July 1st or a week or two before are supposed to be flying out here to move across the country to be part of our community. How's this working? What are the challenges with people traveling across the country, finding housing, meeting potential local quarantine pieces that come up, or testing requirements? Mona, give us a sense of what's going on nationally in this regard.
Sure, Andy, thank you. So travel, across the country may be limited right now, primarily by flight availability, but I think with, enough planning, students are actually even opting to, arrange those schedules in advance, but also driving. So I've corresponded with recent graduates, and just anecdotally, some of them are opting to even take multiple trips by car to avoid actually hiring or the exposure of having movers come and join them. Others are traveling lighter, so if they have to cross state lines and further distances, they are opting to leave furniture behind and then go in and purchase it once they get to their destination. They're leaving earlier, so for those traveling to the Midwest or to New York, they're planning to go earlier and even opt to pay double rent if necessary, just to ensure that they get there on time, that if there's a quarantine that's needed, that they're able to abide by that, and to make sure that they get there in time for orientation. I'd like to also add that the issue about transcripts and licensure. So if there has been any delay in terms of transcripts being sent out by medical schools because of the shutdown, there has been a delay in temporary licensing. So that's something that for students and program directors to be aware of. And then in terms of the testing requirements, that really is a local decision. And my understanding right now is that there isn't a national decision yet by the DIOs.
Yeah, I think we at our place are talking about testing all new members of our community, residents, fellows, faculty, and using that as a way so that people won't have to be quarantined and can start their activities. But as you say, I think it's very, very local. Dave, did you have anything else to add with people moving over to Boston?
Yeah, well, I think that if there's any silver lining to the country reopening right now, I know it's a controversial subject, but at least this is allowing people to move about a little bit more, and the timing could not be better. So people are able, I think, to make these trips however they're going to make them. I found out by people that are coming up here that many realtors are actually doing virtual tours of properties, that you don't actually physically need to go and see the place. You can get a video or a walking tour from the realtor. Doesn't give you the smells of the place, but it certainly gives you the sights of the place. And so that's a real bonus, I think, that realtors have learned. In order to stay in business, they've got to do innovative things like that. No major issues on a state level, and I think many states require some kind of a self-quarantine. We encourage it for 14 days in Massachusetts, and so, but it can't be enforced, obviously. But given that students are ending early and they have this additional time, it should hopefully be a good thing that everybody does. And if there's another silver lining, for once, there's not much traffic in Boston. So my personal commute has gone down by 2/3. And so the traffic to get to where you're going should be a lot better, and the air is cleaner along the way as well.
Jaffer, a tough question that got submitted. Maybe I'll throw it your way with your GES hat on. Talk to us about how does this affect international medical graduates? This has to be even tougher getting into the country, visas, et cetera. What do we know about our international folks who are coming to join us?
It's a great question. So given that 25% of our newly matched residents are international medical graduates, this has a potential for disaster when we think about the delivery of healthcare at that level. Believe it or not, I don't hear that visas and obtaining visas actually is any harder than it was before, given all the different climates that we've been working through. But travel is definitely an issue. So in many countries abroad, interstate travel is non-existent. States are on lockdown. So getting to where they need to get to a consulate office to start the process can be very, very difficult. Many countries aren't even allowing flights to leave the country, and many other countries, although have flights going to the US, they're very few and limited. So getting to the US can be a problem. Once they get to the US, there's another problem. So the CDC has a level 3 restriction on certain countries. And those are China, Iran, most of the UK, Ireland, even most of the European countries. And so if someone's flying or has come from those countries within the last 14 days, once they hit America, they may be declined entry or at least have to go into quarantine for 14 days. And so this represents a potentially big problem that we have to overcome. And we'll have to see. Once they get here, they face all the issues that Mona just brought up. You know, how do I find an apartment? How do I navigate the virtual, the realtors, as David just brought up? And so they're going to face some issues, and this is a very dynamic time. We're going to have to see how this plays out over the rest of this month and into June.
As we think about residents and students, just switching gears based on some Q&A, you know, one of the things that comes up is we've all been, I think, pretty successful in switching things over for patient care to teleneurology, teleservices. But what does that mean for education? Are we still able to do the same quality of education? What ideas do people have about precepting in the clinic or even the hospital when it's telehealth focused? Maybe we'll do Gordon and then Mona for this. Gordon, you want to start first and then we'll move over to Mona?
Thank you for the easy question, Andy. I appreciate it. This has been a real challenge. You know, we, as I think everyone did, pivoted to virtual visits in about 72 hours. So we were, I think, 94% in 72 hours, which is extremely disruptive. And of course, we sent all of our students home. And so I think there were two things that we had to do. One is immediately your clerks can't be in the clinical environment. And so, you know, our clerkship director was super innovative in approaching this and set up kind of a set of virtual patients using actors and use that to train for instance, giving bad news. There was some simulation around LPs, and we had students get certified for the NIH stroke scale and things like that, while providing kind of e-learning tools, both over Zoom and with some other resources that we purchased, while kind of treading water to get them back in. And I think right now, the challenge we're facing is most of the telehealth that was happening initially and actually still now is over telephone, which poses a real problem in terms of how you carry on education. And initially, there really wasn't a lot. The staffing actually was the attending calling the patient afterwards, which wasn't ideal. But what I'm seeing now is drifting into a model where we're actually using Zoom or Doxy.me or these other platforms to bring learners simultaneously together with the patient. And I think what's really cool about it is you can bring the student and resident together with the patient attending, but other family members. You know, instead of visit 2 days ago where, you know, we had the family on one box and the patient on another, and you can have the learners there. And so I think we're still learning how to go about this, but as we become more facile with our virtual visit platforms, hopefully we can turn this into a bit of a strength, although we haven't yet figured out how to get the students into the EMG lab or other procedural opportunities. I know others can speak to using telemedicine to involve students in rounds. We haven't been able to crack that nut. I know others have, but that's another approach.
Mona, I said I'd turn to you next, but there's also a question that came by on this one. Maybe you can address it. How about teaching the neurologic exam, given the limitations of hands-on time with the students and residents? Maybe maybe pick up on that in your answer if you can.
Sure. That actually has been a challenge, and it's a concern that's been raised by students, both in the pre-clerkship years as well as those who are learning virtually right now. And, we're hoping that when they come back is when we give them the hands-on. But in the meantime, fortunately, the AAN has put out a NeuroBite on, the teleneurology exam, which is, a helpful resource. There are various resources around the country, and we've been, fortunate that there's been sort of an explosion of resources being shared through the clerkship consortium and on Synapse. So I think that we still have that limitation. Nothing is going to substitute for that hands-on teaching, but using simulated patients is another opportunity there.
Hey, Sandy, I want to say one other thing, that one of the silver linings of this crisis is the world feels a lot smaller, and we're able to partner together in virtual learning. And Mona has been involved in this, as with colleagues in Hopkins, and the whole webinar from our colleagues in Italy really came out of the realization that what they're facing in Italy isn't terribly different than what we're facing now. And so you have people like Dan Weber at St. Louis University is putting together these online tools that our residency program is using. And I'm hoping that this is going to be a durable benefit, that we can help each other out in our learning. And it's easy to see how that's going to be a win in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, pick any topic, and it seems sort of silly that each one of us at our own institutions has a lecture on the same topic that we trot out every year. I mean, that's a really good point. Ralph, this has come up a few times now, a couple questions submitted ahead of time, even in the Q&A right now, this concern about pipeline. Many institutions, if not most institutions, have sort of canceled all visiting sub-I experiences, and national organizations have urged these to be limited. What does this do to our pipeline? What does this do to students who are looking to experience what it's like to be at a certain institution? And geez, what does it mean for some of these students who might not have a neurology rotation at their individual institution?
Yeah, that's a big problem. I mean, as you know, the pipeline has been so critical. It was something we focused on in my presidency, even getting more medical students to choose neurology as a career. And so this is a concern. So at our place, the same thing right now. We are being told no visiting students, no sub-Is, even our own students can't go elsewhere unless there are a couple caveats. If a student can't get a specific experience at their own place, give an example, if a place doesn't have a neurology clerkship, I believe even the AAN guidelines and the associations have said that would be allowable, obviously under safe circumstances. For our own students, they are not being able to travel. So I think this does pose problems, and this is where I think we're going to have to be more innovative. So, for example, we were just told dermatology is doing it, pathology is doing it, create a virtual clerkship. So we're trying to create a virtual neurology clerkship where even our visiting students could come in, and particularly for us, a lot of international visiting students, and still get some exposure to neurology through this virtual, which is still being planned, clerkship. I think also we get a chance to see them a little bit, because the other thing that happens when especially an international student comes and visits and spends some time with us, we get to see what they're all about. And often, just looking at the paperwork, you may not have ranked them as high. And then when you get to know them and you see how great some of these students are, they get ranked higher and they end up being your residents. So we're really concerned about that. The other thing that's to be innovative about, what if nobody's ever visited Miami? You've seen things on television, but we're thinking about creating some virtual tours, just like we were talking about with real estate, having some videos, having some other ways to bring people together so they can sit down, discuss, and hear about, what the residency is like for students interested. So we're going to have to be really creative, thinking outside of the box to keep that spark alive. There are also AAN resources, as you know, the SIGN program under Gordon and others have created a lot of great central resources to get people more excited about careers in neurology. Those things still exist, and now we have to utilize them, I think, even more.
David, let me pick on you. Just got a question on the Q&A. Well, when these students choose to be neurologists, we hope they still will, our pipeline's intact, they've got to interview and figure out what residency program to go to. I think it's more and more likely that these are going to be all virtual this year. What kinds of things are you thinking of? Maybe it's easier to compete with Ralph and those palm trees over his right shoulder. But what are you doing? Let's start with you, Dave, and maybe Gordon as well. What are we thinking about for residency interviews in the fall and winter? Oh, I think you're still muted, Dave.
Sorry, I think
There
you
you
did
go.
that to me intentionally, Andy. We've had some experience with fellows interviewing already, and I think that's taught us a lot. So this has actually gone very, very well to do Zoom interviews with the fellows, and you can do a very structured day like you normally would, with the meeting of the program director, letting them go through a didactic talk and presentation, meeting the coordinator, but then also doing Zoom rooms so the interviewees and interviewers show up at the right times at the right place. The key really is organization. You've got to make sure that people know, to the minute, because people really aren't late anymore, when to be there, and make sure that the links are all working. So it takes a lot of practice ahead of time. I think other things are to try to create as much of a normal experience as possible. So again, doing virtual tours of the hospital space, the clinic, the places that they'd want to see what it's like outside the environment. As much as you can recreate that, and even having one resident filming another resident walking behind them as if they were actually touring one following another, just creates a much more real experience for them. I think you can do a lot of creative things. I've always found that the most important part of the interview day is the time that the interviewees spend with the residents. And so you've got to get that in place and have that lunch, the FAQs, no attendings allowed, nobody from the program directorship. Let them actually really talk about what it's like and see the camaraderie between the residents and ask the important questions, and even have a lot of planted questions, because even under in-person lunches, you can have a lot of awkward silences and things like that. So we can actually say, these are the things that you really should know. These are the pluses and minuses of our program. I mean, not that we have any minuses, but these are the pluses of our program, the things that you should know, and the things that might make you not want to come here if this wasn't, your phenotype. Those are some of the things that we're thinking about for the fall.
And
Gordon?
Andy, if I
Oh, please go ahead, Mona.
Sure. So we did a needs assessment with the UES collaborative work group, and many of the things that have been mentioned already have come up. And in particular, we looked at clerkship directors, program directors, and students and their perspectives on this. And what they are primarily concerned about with interviews, as well as with not having the away rotations, is, as Dave just mentioned, that inability to connect the residents with the students. So as we're planning forward, really focusing on that aspect of it, as well as both, all groups really needed more guidance on how to conduct the virtual interviews. The majority of them, outside of the fellowships who have already, done some of that, the majority had not actually, participated in that. I'd also like to just to talk a little bit about the pipeline, if I could. And we do have concerns, particularly for those students coming from schools that don't have the required clerkship. It's the minority of allopathic schools, but actually the majority of osteopathic schools. And so in our needs assessment, the students were primarily concerned about not being able to assess the institutional culture, being able to really sort of showcase themselves, or really find out whether that program was a good fit for them. And even though there is an exception to the AAMC recommendation about away rotations, if the institution is not allowing students to come forth, they won't be able to rotate. Although, as Ralph mentioned, being creative with some of these virtual electives is going to be very important, perhaps even holding them regionally with multiple program directors so that they can sort of meet each other.
I think those are good points. I'm going to turn to you in a second, Gordon, but I think the other piece, Mona, just basing on what you just said, is I'm concerned, we've had such a thrust for increasing diversity within neurology, and many of these away rotation programs are focused against, focused for folks who are underrepresented in medicine. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose that, either in the pipeline piece or when we're talking about residency interviews where we're trying to focus on diversity. That's an important piece that we've made such strides on in the short term that we really don't want to lose that kind of momentum. I think that'll be important as well. Gordon, other points that you'd think about as we move to a virtual interview time in the fall?
Yes, I think of this as there's sort of two pieces. The front piece is sort of getting people signed up for interviews. I actually worry a lot about the diversity piece. we're anticipating that there are likely to be a lot more people interviewing, that the activation energy to interview at 20 places now, you don't have to hop on an airplane. And that's going to make it particularly difficult to not only select between candidates and put together a rank list, but to figure out who's just visiting with you out of just having a backup and out of abundance of caution who's interested. The other problem is how do you define yourself, right? Programs that aren't as well known rely on selling people on their unique culture in the program and feeling the interaction between faculty and residents, perhaps the community, learning about the community, and all of those things become very different. It can't just be, we're really, we give good education and have research opportunities and an international neurology program. I think we're talking about how can we convey the unique things about our program using multimedia, really beefing up our website, focusing on social media strategy. Are there ways of having group interactions and to really replicate? Someone made the point, maybe it was you, Andy, about, or I think it was Dave, it's the evening, the night before with the residents, and then the social interactions with faculty. And so, I, like many, we're doing Zoom cocktail hours with our friends. Can we channel some of that into this? I think it's really, you got to define yourself and differentiate yourself, because otherwise, if they think we look a lot like UCSF, except we're not ranked as high, we're going to have a hard time competing with you. So we need to demonstrate our unique attributes. And I do think Mona mentioned the UES has a work group focusing on this, and I think we're going to have more feedback from that soon that'll hopefully be helpful for everyone.
I guess as we're thinking about things that might, please go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, to say, getting that kind of personal connection is harder sometimes with Zoom. So the night before, where our residents usually had dinner, it was usually a couple of our current residents and all of the new interviewing residents had dinner together without faculty. We're going to do the same thing, but do it virtually. And you hope you can get that kind of flavor for personality style, which is what sometimes will be a little trickier through Zoom, and having those separate events in some way virtually the night before, I think are still so important.
We talk about, silver linings. I've always just really worried about these medical students and the expense to travel to all these programs. I mean, my goodness. And so this is going to be a different story. You're right, Gordon. I'm sure people will put in more applications to different places for a variety of reasons, but not burdening them with the financial harness of having to go to all these places and pay for flights and hotels. And I think is the silver lining that will help some of these medical students. Mona, I want to come back to the medical students specifically. In many of our places, clerkships have shut down or been somehow abridged. Students aren't in the hospital because of or limited in their time in the hospital because of a surge. How are we getting students back, especially in areas of the country that still have high rates of infection? Obviously, there's limitations of PPE that are in play. Are these departmental decisions? Are these institutional decisions? Are there things that your group at the AAN are doing to advocate for students to get some neurology experience? Where are we in this landscape?
Sure. So really, I think it's a decision that is as local. So since the situation still remains fluid, the AAMC is really recommending that institutions look at what's happening locally. And so if there is still a concern about active infection and community spread and limitation of PPE, they're still abiding by their mid-March recommendation that students not return to the clinical sites. However, for those areas where those don't apply, in other words, the spread is less, it's not an active concern, and there's enough PPE, then they're allowing the institutions to slowly bring students back, but with a lot of caveats. So the students have to be trained. We have to make sure they have enough and consistent PPE available, and that we have monitoring of their interactions as well as availability of testing, both for students as well as residents. So there's a lot involved. We've had discussions about when we bring students back based on the number of patients that may be available and the PPE. Do we still keep some of them virtually learning and the other ones come back to clinical sites, whether it's in the outpatient or in the inpatient arena. Through the Academy, we have actually, with many of our colleagues and resources, so the synapses have been lit, if you will, with lots of discussion about resources and ways to develop, curriculum. So we have had interinstitutional collaboration, and it's a wonderful time for us to be innovative, as was mentioned as well. So we have been very active through the AAN and through our UES collaborative work groups to come up with some resources and solutions for the situation.
Mona, a question on the Q&A. If these clerkships are a little more virtual or a lot more virtual or completely virtual, what does that do to our letters of recommendation? How are we going to be able to judge a medical student and how she or he can perform if we're not able to see him as a sub-I, if their clerkship was virtual? Is there thought about this nationally?
There's a lot of thought and there's a lot of concern about it. Students clearly, as well as the program directors. So for students who don't have a required experience, who are planning to go elsewhere, both for an audition rotation to check out the place, as well as have a letter of recommendation potentially, that is a real concern. So I think as an organization, we need to be thinking about, as others are across, disciplines, what kind of a consensus statement or recommendation do we share, not only with our program directors, but our students as well, in regards to the letters of recommendation and other aspects of the residency application process. So are we going to require fewer letters? Is it going to be okay for them to have fewer neurology letters, as long as it's a strong letter from others that they work with? So I think we really need to be thinking about that.
Maybe I'll Ralph and then Jaffer. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the fellows. We haven't really talked much about the fellows. You had mentioned, Ralph, that the interviews are, virtual and there's a little more experience with them. What about jobs? I mean, some of these fellows must have been in job hunting mode at the time that the pandemic hit. Can some not find jobs because of hiring freezes? Have there been offer letters that have been rescinded or transitions from fellow to faculty that have to be paused? Where are we? Ralph and then Jaffer.
Yeah, this is not easy, and I think it's variable depending on different institutions. I know if many of my fellows are out there listening, they're all worried. A number of my fellows we were about to bring on. In fact, we had a record number of 6 fellows that we were bringing on as faculty. And obviously when this all hit, there are major financial repercussions, and they've asked us to push out the transitions from fellowship to faculty promotion. And obviously all because of financial concerns. So it's a case-by-case basis. If it's a certain fellow, they ask for now the P&L, the profit and loss statement for them if they're coming into epilepsy or MS or interventional, then the finances may look a little better. So right now we have to go through a separate committee called the JOLT, Joint Operation Leadership Team, that helps review each of these on a case-by-case basis. Some of the fellows, believe it or not, still got some competing offers. Obviously you have a competing offer that does help. Most of the competing offers I have found that have come into a couple of my fellows have been from private practice groups that are still looking to pull them in. But that helps me because then I can go to leadership and say, hey, this person's in really high demand. I really want to keep them. I think right now for us, we hope to keep them. It's just the delay in the transition of when that they'll make that transition from fellow to faculty. I'm hoping it'll be as early as 3, 6, hopefully not more than 6 months. But it is a concern because we want to keep, our best and brightest that we had made promises to, but they hadn't signed on the dotted line yet. I don't think we're alone. Everybody's in the same boat right now with this, and hopefully we can get them to sit tight with us and stay and come aboard soon.
Jaffer?
Well, at the risk of saying something very odd, I'll just state this. If a pandemic of this severity has to hit, it hit at a better time. It could have been December, right? Because you said everybody was in job hunting mode. Even our senior residents were in somewhat of a fellowship hunting mode at times. So we have actually kept all of our obligations to our fellows who wanted to sign on. So I feel very fortunate that our university was able to do that. And I know that's not the case, obviously, across the board. And I'll just add also, I've heard the opposite from residents saying now they're probably going to start to hunt for fellowships at the last minute because those may be available more readily than actual job opportunities out in the community.
maybe one for everyone. It kind of goes back to where we started with well-being. Maybe Dave, I'll start with you. This is just so important. One of our Q&As, brings up, we have students and residents whose family members maybe passed away secondary to COVID, who were ill. What should we be doing for our students, trainees, and faculty to help with well-being? Now that clerkships are restarting, are we worried even more and more about burnout, not only of the trainees, but of the teachers themselves, who now have to balance patient care more with teaching, et cetera, et cetera. We mentioned a few things. This is a huge topic, but Dave, a few tips on well-being that you could share with the group?
I would say it's the little things. First of all, talking about it and making sure that people understand that we do value it. Making people aware of the resources that are available to them, such as psychiatric resources and mental health resources. This is a big deal, and it is affecting almost everybody mentally. And so being aware of what is available to you and taking advantage of it is very important. And then, in terms of a very little thing, but which is actually a big thing, one of our assistant program directors bought little plants for every resident and drove to every single one of our 21 residents' houses and dropped off a wellness plant.
With a mask.
With a mask, yes. She was driving around the city for 7 hours and did this, and they loved it. I mean, it sounds like insane. I mean, who would do that? But she did it, and it was a huge hit. So, it's these little acts of kindness. I mean, it's like it's written on the bumper sticker. Some bumper stickers are incredibly profound. The small acts of kindness can carry some of the biggest weight in the world.
People have other suggestions?
Yeah. So I can add a couple of things. One, and that simple is best is very true. One of the major concerns early on were two very simple items. Will I have PPE, and do I have food? And meeting those needs and acknowledging those needs are very, very important. I think as we played through this, processing what I'm going through from a standpoint of a trainee became extremely important. We actually had a group of psychologists hold individual town halls, town meetings with individual programs, and getting the residents together, no program directors, no faculty, no staff, just the residents, to explore what they were going through and help them better understand what they were going through. Interestingly enough, our program directors needed it as well. And those simple interventions actually went a long way in helping them, and then also in a long way of showing appreciation.
That's great. I know at our place, our department, and I'll get to Ralph, I know at our place, our Department of Psychiatry has put together just a wonderful resource page to help you not only have outlets for addressing mental health, but to make sure everybody's thinking about it, screening for it, personally and in people they supervise. I think it's been really helpful across our entire campus. Ralph, you were going to add some additional thoughts.
I was going to say, we also have added, the virtual happy hours that they get together, and adding some humor, even in our grand rounds. And I'm not the best joke teller or anything, but my VCA, my Vice Chair for Administration, she has been throwing up all these funny pictures and funny anecdotes, and adding some humor to it really does help.
Mona, maybe I'll just turn to you. I sort of got at it with the last question, but I think this question of, some faculty members are, already struggling with burnout, in especially areas with high rates of infection. When you add on clerkship students coming back in, education is one of the things we do. This is what we all love. This is why many of us went into neurology, but this is an added piece that may lead to burnout. How do you think about that, Mona, as we try to incorporate these students back into our world?
Real issues. And I think that, our chairs, our BAs that are on the call as well, I'm glad they're here to encourage and really think about the well-being of our faculty, particularly when the impetus right now is to get the clinical, care up and going in the clinical areas. And there may be less time for teaching, yet we still need to teach. So I think that frequent communication, the frequent recognition, some time for them to be able to continue to engage in teaching is going to be very important, particularly when we talk about our pipeline. There is a real concern. There's a potential threat here that students that, come from schools that don't have a required rotation, or even with the truncation of some of the clerkship experiences. And we can either talk about it now or in a few minutes, but thinking forward in terms of what can happen in curriculum as we're trying to do the same amount of curriculum within a shorter period of time, what is the impact that that's going to have on our clerkship experiences, and something that we really need to be forward thinking about.
That's a great question. Let's go to a silver lining question. Maybe I'll ask it to everyone here as we get towards the end of our session. This has been a horrendous pandemic, obviously, but many times during this conversation, people have brought up the quote silver lining. Maybe I'll ask everyone to give one thing that you think we've learned or adapted during the pandemic in neurologic education that you think will be long lasting, a change that happens suddenly, but it's something that's great, and we're going to keep doing it. I'm just going to go in order from what I can see. Jaffer, you want to start? Whoever goes last has the hardest one. We'll make it
thank
round.
you.
Go ahead, Jaffer.
Well, I'm just going to say preparedness. Never in my lifetime, or anybody on this call, would ever think that they would experience what we've just experienced and what we're going to go through over the next probably 6 to 12 months. So as this wave, or vacillation occurs, which probably will occur over the next 1 to 2 years, I think we're going to be better prepared for it. And if anything else hits to this magnitude, hopefully never will, we will also be better prepared for it.
It's a great one. Gordon, how about you? What would be a one silver lining?
Boy, I'm glad I got to go second. I think the ability to, I already mentioned this earlier, to work together as a team. And, you said it right, Andy. It doesn't make sense that we're all delivering our own canned talks on things. And I think there's a much richer opportunity for us to collaborate. And, I could point to multiple examples. If you look at Roy Stroud's work, or, I already mentioned the work that Mona's doing, the webinar that we did with the Italians. I think there's a lot to learn, and I think that's going to be a durable benefit for us.
Mona, how about you?
So I think our resilience and our adaptability has been incredibly positive. And in terms of the collaboration, not only interinstitutional, but just the opportunity for us to do that across divisions, across departments, even within our own institution, is something that I foresee, continuing even past the pandemic.
Dave?
Well, at least I'm not last. I would say that bringing in outside speakers is something that we're hoping can be very durable. It's very hard for our colleagues to say no now, since we're not asking them to travel. We'll find a time that's convenient for them. So we've actually been able to get a lot of all-star speakers, and Andy, I'll speak with you about that later. We'll get you on for next week. But it's a great way of actually getting expertise from other places. It's convenient for the speaker also. I'm going back to Temple next week to give grand rounds, and I love it. It's a really wonderful experience, and that's something that should be durable over the long term.
Before I go to Ralph, I'm going to do one from the Q&A. Someone said, hey, I'll put in the Q&A my own silver lining. I think it's a great one. Using video applications allows us to easily and flexibly supervise our residents as they interact with patients in the outpatient setting, in continuity clinic, and in other settings. I've seen some things I hadn't seen before. Isn't that the case? I think we all appreciate that. Ralph, final word. What's your silver lining?
Well, the final word has to be the virtual connectiveness, the virtual neurology that has happened so quickly, both for telemedicine, for virtual outpatient and ambulatory care. I think it's brought us together, and I've been telling a lot of people, even though we call it social distancing, it really isn't. It's physical distancing. And the fact that we have FaceTime and all of this Zoom, it's brought people closer together. And I think even in my department, I sense a greater connectiveness. And I think a lot of it is due to also the virtual connections where we can remain social and we can beat this pandemic through those technologies that we now have available. Think if we didn't have this, what it would be like. And it's made a difference for our patients, our students, our residents, and our fellows.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. I want to thank all of our panelists, and most importantly, all of you for taking the time to join us on this webinar. Please give us this feedback. Let us know how we can do more of these to help. And I hope everybody takes time to take care of themselves, take care of their family, and take care of each other. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.